If you are a first-time visitor here and you're not acquainted with our library programming, I would invite you to pick up one of our monthly calendars. This is for March. We've got a stack of them out there. We do 2 or 3 evening events a week on average, and a lot of them are authors like Jeannie, and community forums. We have performances. It's a terrific lineup. Actually, Kansas City Library has really made a national reputation, kind of set the bar nationally for what libraries can do with public programming. We're very proud of that, and we're also very proud to have Jeannie here tonight. Before we start, I would like to introduce Kate Heinen. She's with the Metropolitan Organization to Counter Sexual Assault. She's just going to say a few words, and I'll be right back. Thank you.
Hi, so I'm Kate Heinen, and I'm a social worker with MOXA, the Metropolitan Organization to Counter Sexual Assault. We're the local rape response and prevention center here in Kansas City. Some folks have probably heard of us. Can you raise your hand if you've heard of us? Okay, great. Oh, wow, okay. So just wanted to let everyone know that since part of the conversation tonight that we're so glad that Jeannie's here, it will be talking about sexual assault. We are here to support you. I'll be here, and then Debbie Fredrickson in the back will also be here to provide support. And also, if you just want more information about our work or how to get involved, we have a table set up outside, and we'll just be around, so you're welcome to come find us. Thank you.
Well, again, I want to welcome you, and I want to thank you guys for being here for what I think's not just, or what I know is not just a compelling program, but what I think is an important program tonight. A couple of months ago, back in December, my colleague Katie Stover, and she's here someplace, there she is in the back, came to me with Jeannie Vanasco's new book, Things we didn't talk about when I was a girl. For those of you who don't have haven't had the pleasure of getting to know Katie, she's the library's director of reader services, and she selects a notable book every 6 to 8 weeks for her series of FYI book club community reads and discussions. And I'll interject here real quick that she selected this book, and that discussion, you're welcome to come to it, is on Saturday, March 14th at 1 o'clock at the UMKC Women's Center. And Jeannie has been kind enough, she will Skype in during the discussion. So these are very worthwhile sessions. Anyway, I'm a writer. That's my job in large part with the library and in public affairs. And so to get the word out about Katie's upcoming discussions, about each of the books and each of the discussions, I'll interview the author, and I'll write an 1,800-word or so piece that appears in the Kansas City Star. They run it in their Sunday section. And it's one of the more enjoyable parts of my job. So in this case, in every case, I start by reading Jeannie's book. And I've told Katie this, and I've told Jeannie this. This wasn't a book that I probably would have otherwise picked up to read, left to my own means. It's a difficult subject matter, and some might consider it probably a book that's more consumable by women than it is by men. But I started reading and was immediately sucked in. By the time I'd finished, I felt this wasn't just a book that I was glad that I'd read. I felt that it was a book that I needed to read. That it's not just a book that women need to read, that it's a book that men need to read. There have been a lot of important, very valuable, and obviously very heart-rendering contributions to the Me Too conversation today. This book stands out. Jeannie was perceptive enough and she was brave enough to write a book about her rape that gave voice to the man who committed the rape. An act that was all the more heinous because he'd been one of her closest friends in high school. Now, I say Jeannie was brave because she confronted in writing an incident that literally gave her nightmares for 14 years. And she confronted the man, she called him Mark in the book, who'd committed the offense that destroyed their friendship. Jeannie is brave also for actually releasing the book with his voice in it, and substantially so, not knowing how that was going to be received. As she put it to me when I interviewed her for the story in the Star, I don't want to be an apologist for rapists. Concerned about how other women, feminists in particular, might accept this. But what she did through her voice and his was drive home the insidiousness of rape. Statistics are stark, and a lot of you have probably heard them. 1 in 5 women in the United States will be raped at some point in their lives. In 8 of 10 cases, the women knew their attackers. Sometimes the perpetrator is a Harvey Weinstein. We can see the villainy. But sometimes it's a friend, it's a classmate, it's a neighbor, or an otherwise, quote, regular guy. Outwardly, perhaps a good guy. More important, through Jeannie's book, she gave me an understanding of what a victim of rape goes through. There's not just her nightmares, but her thought process, her concerns, her doubts, her hopes. Katie Stover, I want to thank you for seeing to it that I read this book. And Jeannie, I want to thank you for writing it. Jeannie was born and raised in Sandusky, Ohio, on the shore of Lake Erie. It's almost exactly halfway between Toledo and Cleveland. She's now living in Baltimore. She's an assistant English professor at Towson University. She's written 2 memoirs. Her first, The Glass Eye, revolved around the impact of her father's death when she was 18 and in her first year of college at Northwestern. Things We Didn't Talk About When I Was a Girl was released last October, and it has drawn national notice. It was a New York Times Editor's Choice, a Kirkus Best Book of the Year, and a Time Magazine Must-Read Book of 2019. Am I getting ahead to say that you're also going to be featured on This American Life on NPR? So we have it for sale outside, and we will again after the event, and Jeannie will sign copies. It might not have the same impact on you as it did me. It will have an impact on you of some kind. Jeannie, we're honored to have you here tonight. Thank you so much for coming, and would all of you please join me in welcoming Jeannie Vanasco.
Hi, thank you all for coming. Thank you for that. It's like the best introduction. Thank you so much. So I'm going to read just a brief excerpt. It's strange. As a writer, I actually don't like readings because my attitude is often, well, I know how to read. I don't need someone to read it to me. But in order to set the tone and to set up what I'm going to talk about, like how the book came to be, and how uncomfortable and scary it was for me to release this book. Not so much to write it, but to release it. I feel it's important to set it up by just giving a short reading. So I'm just going to read the prologue and then the very beginning of part 1. It should take like 7 or 8 minutes. And then I'm going to talk. And then I'm also going to do something I have never done before publicly. And that is I'm going to play an excerpt of one of the phone conversations I had with my friend, former friend, Mark. I've shared the audio once publicly, but they used a voice modulator. And it was one of those voices where you can't help but sound like a criminal. You know, they used that on him. And it was, so I'm gonna actually use the real, I'm not changing his voice. It'll be his real voice. So I'm gonna play, if there's time, I have 2 excerpts, but definitely play one. And then I'm happy to answer any questions. Please don't be shy. If you're here, then it means you care, and don't worry about potentially asking something that's I've been asked everything, so don't worry about asking me anything that could hurt my feelings. So I'm just gonna start with the beginning. And you all can hear me okay? Okay. And one other thing, I will not be offended if you need to get up and leave for whatever reason. That doesn't bother me. Okay. Early evening. We were in your car at the end of your block at a stop sign. The streets were empty. My window was open because I hated closed windows, probably because I thought my "why drive if you can't feel the wind" attitude made me profound. We were 16. I just needed to leave my house, you said. With a few classmates, we'd been cramming for an exam about waves and optics and contemplating why our accomplished physics teacher taught at our poorly ranked public high school. Cost of living, witness protection, he actually likes Sandusky. When we left, our classmates were writing formulas on their wrists with fine point markers. Let's drive until we hit civilization, I said. You stared straight ahead at something it seemed that couldn't be seen. Somewhere with a bookstore, I said, like a real bookstore, one with a poetry section that's more than one shelf. You squeezed the steering wheel, and suddenly your pale knuckles looked cartoonish, like a badly rendered, on-shaded drawing of knuckles. I barely glanced at your face. I sensed you were resisting tears. You told me I was important to you. I told you I knew that. And you said, no, really, you're the only one who understands me. You turned, looked at me, then quickly looked away. I had never seen you cry before. I hadn't seen many teenage boys cry, but I didn't say that. I know you understand this, you said. I just get so lonely. This is probably my favorite memory of us. I know you're sad now, I said, but I promise this will be a happy memory someday. Us at this perfectly straight stop sign. You nodded, and I wonder if I explained my observation, or if my observation was insightful enough to imply its metaphoric meaning, as in, let's notice when things are right. The memory stops there. If you were critiquing this, you might say, come on, Jeannie, it's a little too perfect, don't you think? The memory stopping at a stop sign. There are gaps. I already predict failure. I'm afraid he'll say no, or even worse, ignore me. But why wouldn't he agree to speak with me? He owes me that much. I could disguise his identity, change his name. Combing a naming dictionary for some rough translation of friend, I first land on Aldwin, old friend. I picture a knight, an 11th century Norman invader, a sorcerer in a fantasy novel, a president of a Martha's Vineyard men's club, a child of artfully tattooed parents. Between 1880 and 2016, the Social Security Administration recorded only 129 babies named Aldwin. My former friend's pseudonym should be common, modern, unassuming. I want readers to know someone with the same name. Phil means friend, but he's not the Phil type. Phil orders everybody drinks. Phil shakes your hand, says, call me Phil. Phil's too casual, too laid back. My former friend may have slacked from one day into the next, but he wavered between anxious and depressed. Philip, then? Philip contains friend of horses, but I doubt he ever touched a horse. He preferred the indoors, rarely straying from couch, desk, and bed. His white skin burned easily. Forget name origins. What about the origins of words that are also names, like Nick? Some of Nick's obsolete meanings, reckoning or account, slang for the vagina. But I dated a Nick in college briefly between boyfriends. I'd prefer that memories of Nick, him telling me, I could tell you weren't very cultured when I met you, and how have you not heard of Broken Social Scene? And I don't understand why you won't sleep with me if you like me, not influence this project. Though I like the sound of Nick. So I want a monosyllabic word that works as a name and contains a K. Mark, maybe? Its main definition, a boundary. And that's what this is about, boundaries. Perfect. Mark, then. Why should I protect Mark? I enter his work address in Google Street View. Instead of his pale yellow office building on an industrial one-way street, I aim my view at the clouds and telephone wires. The wires don't line up precisely. There are gaps of just sky, gaps between communication. I should stop searching for metaphors. Mark and I stopped speaking to one another in college. He was in Ohio studying engineering. I was in Illinois majoring in journalism. He dropped out shortly after we last spoke, which is not to say I'm the reason, or that what happened between us is the reason, but I hope it's the reason, or rather, what he did to me during winter break of our sophomore year is, I hope, the reason. I can't forget. I was passed out. Mark now manages a camera shop. I recently found an online forum where he answers questions about cameras. Someone asked if a blur in a photo can be good, and Mark replied, if the intent is to give an abstract rendering for some artistic reason, then it's acceptable. When no such intent exists, it's merely bad technique that has caused something that should be sharp to blur. If he could photograph that night, would he blur it? Where would he blur it? My memory is blurry. There are gaps. But I know what he did, and he does too. The next day, or maybe a few days later, he apologized. I should not have done that to you. I am so sorry. It was not okay. Can you ever forgive me? I said I could. I said I would. I told him to read J.D. Salinger's Franny and Zooey, my favorite novel back then. I cringe at the memory. He read it and told me it reminded him of us. But no one in the book carries his drunk friend into a basement, takes off her clothes while she's passed out, fingers her, masturbates over her while she cries and tells her, it's just a dream. I'm so glad you liked the book, is what I said. A year later, Mark dropped out of college. He moved back home, tried therapy, became a mechanic. At least this is what his dad told my mom. By then, our friendship had ended, though I doubt his parents and siblings knew why. Friends grow apart is probably what they thought. As with many things after my dad died, I never told my mom. Mark, according to LinkedIn, returned to college, earned a bachelor's in interdisciplinary studies, and several years later, a master's in civil engineering. When we were friends, I told him, someday you'll become a famous engineer. You'll discover a formula so complicated that high school students will write it on their wrists before exams. Every time I think about him, I feel pissed off and sad. I understand now why nostalgia for hundreds of years was considered a chronic mental illness. I want to hate him, but I can't. And now it's the end of the reading. I'm gonna shift into, I have some notes for myself just so I stay on track and don't go off on a tangent, but I thought I would tell you about how the book came to be and why I wrote it the way that I did. So 14 years had passed since the rape had happened, and I had trouble using that word, which I'll get into. So 14 years after, I was still asking myself why it had happened. And with this memoir, I decided I wanted to extend the why to him, speaking with him on the record about that night and its aftermath. The aftermath, not only for me, I mean, yes, I wanted to tell him how much it had affected me, but I also wanted to ask him about the aftermath for him. How had it affected him? Did he think about it anymore? Also, how did he remember it? I felt really uncomfortable wanting to even run my memory of that night by him to give him that sort of power, but I wanted to know his version. How would he tell the story? And I understood how controversial that would be, that in some ways, I risked coming across as a rape apologist. And that's why I was really terrified about releasing this book. I mean, interviewing him, I wasn't so scared of that. I mean, interviewing him, I felt put me in a position of power. I was in control of the questions. I could be tough. I told myself I would be tough. He would be on the defensive. And then I heard his voice. And suddenly all the fond memories of our friendship started coming back to me. And I told him everything was okay. I mean, this was 14 years later. I called to tell him how upset I am. And in the beginning of the book, there's this back and forth where I tell him, like, oh, I'm going to tell him that he ruined everything. And then listening back to the audio, I was trying to decide if I would play that audio or not. But it's mortifying how I remember saying, like, oh no, it's okay. Like, we talked about it. We talked about what happened. I'm past it. I can write the book. I just immediately slipped into being extremely accommodating to him. It didn't feel like a performance at the time. It felt genuine. And I think part of it is we had been incredibly close friends for 5 years. I mean, he hadn't been some villainous guy. He'd been sensitive. He was a good listener. He was the sort of guy who he'd ask me how I was feeling. And then a few days later, he would follow up and ask if I still felt the same way. I mean, not many guys I knew when I was a teenager did that, would actually want to talk about feelings. And so he didn't fulfill the stereotype of a rapist, but that's why, or just a perpetrator, but that's why I wanted to write the book, is because I felt like we were seeing this dominant narrative of powerful men, such as Harvey Weinstein, where it was easy to dislike them. And I thought, okay, but what about, I wasn't seeing this narrative about what about the guys we trust and that we, don't think of as perpetrators or potential perpetrators. And that's partly why I wrote the book the way I did and structured it the way I did, where you see us together as friends in the prologue. I wanted to open in that way. And then in an early chapter after the passage I read, I tried to recount good memories in the order in which I remembered them. And when my first book, The Glass Eye, came out, it was October of 2017, and that was the New York Times and the New Yorker were, breaking stories about Weinstein's pattern of abuse. And while on tour for that book, I was asked questions about one particular scene in The Glass Eye, and it was the scene of Mark carrying me passed out into his basement room and sexually assaulting me. And it occupies less than a page. And that's partly because I didn't want that narrative to distract from the larger narrative of that book. I mean, that book, the night before he died, I promised my dad I would write a book for him. And that book was about my love for him, my grief for him, his grief for his daughter, Jeannie, my namesake. I'm named after her. She died when she was 16. And it was about my experiences with bipolar disorder and how my grief had influenced the ways in which I experienced psychosis. But with Me Too in the news while on tour for The Glass Eye, I was asked so many questions about this one scene, the one with Mark. And I didn't even include other experiences with sexual assault in The Glass Eye. For example, this comes up in this memoir, but I was raped in my 20s by a different friend, but that seemed to me a more clear-cut instance of rape. And as a writer, it sounds like almost Neanderthal to say, but I'm interested in language and how we define certain things. And when I started writing this book, I definitely did not use the word rape when describing what Mark did. And there is a shift in the book where I suddenly do start using it and where he even starts using it. He describes himself as a rapist. And And the other reason, though, I didn't write, there's this other guy, who'd raped me in my 20s, but I wasn't as close with him. So Mark interested me more as a subject. I thought about that night a lot more than I ever thought about the night with this other guy. And Mark had called me several days after the rape to apologize, and I told him we all make mistakes, and that was that. And I even tried hanging out with him a couple of times after in group settings. And I think I was trying to find some sense of normalcy. I was trying to pretend it hadn't happened. And so all these years later, 14 years later, I thought about that phone call, that first apology, or semi-apology. He qualified it with, well, we were both really drunk. So it wasn't like a real apology. But I thought, well, maybe he feels bad enough. Like he still feels bad that he would talk with me. And I was upfront with him at the start of our first phone conversation. I said, look, I want to write a book about our friendship and about what had happened. And he said, if you feel strongly about it, then I think you should. I didn't tell him on that first call that I was recording it. And I also didn't tell him that the statute of limitations was still active in Ohio. Like he could still be held accountable. And I thought, well, he can look that up. And at the beginning of our second phone call, though, I did tell him I was recording it, and he said, oh, I assumed you were. Like, that's fine. And so the book includes transcripts of our phone conversations, and I met with him in person as well. It includes a transcript of that recorded conversation, and the transcripts are broken apart, and I transcribed them in bursts, and after each short excerpt of the conversation, I reflect on it. And certainly there were aspects of the transcripts that I wanted to delete. I mean, there's so many things that are like really mortifying, like how accommodating I was. I mean, there was within one page of the transcripts, I said something like, I hope this is helpful for you. I hope you know I don't hate you. I hope you know I think you're a really good person. I mean, it was just like, I wanted to remove that. I mean, I thought, well, clearly maybe just like one, I hope you, like we don't need all three. But then I thought, well, no, we do. Like these are the transcripts. Like I'm not putting myself forward as this is how one should react. I'm putting myself forward as this is how I reacted, because I think we don't necessarily always react the way that, that we think we will. And the book's form became clearer to me the more I talked with my female friends, because they were so much more critical of the transcripts. I mean, they didn't know him, and they noticed false equivalencies that he was making. Like, I mean, I remember also at one point he sent me photographs of an abandoned factory because he thought, oh, this is like an expression of my feelings after the first phone conversation. I was like, oh, how thoughtful. And my friends, Jung and Molly, just looked at me like, what? Like, that's so obnoxious. But also as a writer, I was like, oh, that's useful. That's like material. That's something tangible. I can use that. And so it's at a certain point too, while writing the book, I thought of like what was useful to me as a writer, and it was almost as if I stopped even seeing myself as a person who was experiencing this. Like I was viewing even my present self as a character. And so my female friends became really essential. So some of the false equivalencies they noticed him making were things like, we were both really drunk. We were both really depressed. And so then I didn't want the book to be just his and my voices. I include conversations with my female friends sort of in scene, and they're an important part of the narrative. And so the book, I wanted to read, and I read an excerpt of it because I wanted to show you how it unfolds in real time. And as the book unfolds and proceeds, it shows how I changed my mind in terms of what I thought of him. And I don't like this idea that I sometimes hear about memoir, where you need to wait X amount of years before you have properly processed something, before you can write about it. Because I think you can write more than one memoir about the same subject, and that doesn't make you a narcissist. I tell my students, I think there's a distinct difference between being self-aware and self-absorbed. Of course, I have a vested interest in this, as I've now published 2 memoirs. But I tell my students, like, each of us probably knows at least one person who can be self-absorbed a lot of the time. Like, you tell that person something that happened to you, and then she suddenly makes it about herself, and you're no longer talking about what you had wanted to talk about. Whereas I think a self-aware person, would listen and would possibly then share her own experiences if they're relevant as a means of making you feel comfortable, as a means of making herself vulnerable and therefore make you feel comfortable with sharing. And I think a memoirist who makes herself vulnerable makes it easier for readers to feel less alone. Not that that's the memoirist's job, but it's what I think attracts so many readers to memoir. And so I thought that if I included my supposedly imperfect thoughts, that then anyone else who has gone through this would not feel as if she'd thought or felt the wrong way. And I know I'm using the she pronoun, but I do want to recognize, sexual assault, regardless of gender identity. It happens to people regardless of their gender identity. I'm just using she because it's more convenient in this case. I think a lot of us feel silenced when our thoughts and feelings clash with how we're encouraged to think and feel. And that's partly why I felt so afraid of releasing this book. So for example, the shame that I felt in 2003 when the rape happened, and the shame that I felt in 2018 when writing this book made talking about the rape really hard, yet the shame existed for different reasons. In 2003, I felt shame because my behavior conflicted with popular portrayals of the good victim. I'd been drinking that night, I didn't fight back, I froze. And then in 2018, I felt shame because my thoughts and feelings conflicted with those voiced by Me Too supporters I admire. I didn't hate Mark. I didn't want him held legally accountable. I didn't even know if I could call what he did rape. And I actually wanted to talk to him, to ask him how the experience had affected him. And honestly, I missed him. I missed my friend. And so I think vulnerability, though, can also widen perspectives. I mean, I don't know if anyone here is following the Harvey Weinstein trial in New York, but how his lawyers, the defense, have criticized the women. I don't like the term accusers. I don't really know what to use, but the women for staying in touch with Weinstein, that because they stayed in touch with him, then that must mean that they had consented. And that logic really upsets me. And so with this book, I'm hoping to dispel notions like that, cliched notions of how a victim's sexual assault reacts. I don't know if anyone heard the interview that she gave to the New York Times podcast, The Daily. Did anyone hear that? So Megan Twohey and Jodi Kantor, the two journalists, I saw you have She Said here in the library. It's so good. So they're the two New York Times journalists who broke the Harvey Weinstein story. And I think it was Megan Twohey who asked Weinstein's defense attorney, Donna Rotunno, asked her at the end, have you ever been sexually assaulted? And his lawyer said no, and there was a pause. And I thought I was on a treadmill. I thought the interview was over. And then I heard her say, because I would never put myself in that position. And I actually almost fell off the treadmill. I thought that's a cliche. Who does that? Slipping on a banana peel? But I was in such shock. And so I think there's a social good that can arise out of self-aware memoirs, that it's not narcissistic to share your experiences. And I like this quote by Sheila Heti. It's from her novel, How Should a Person Be? And it goes, I thought about how difficult it is to live in this world without any clothes on. I know it's the gods who determine who among us is fated to go through life with her clothes off. When the gods gather around a baby in its cradle and dole out their gifts and curses, this is one aspect of things they consider. Most people live their entire lives with their clothes on, and even if they wanted to, couldn't take them off. Then there are those who cannot put them on. They are the ones who live their lives not just as people, but as examples of people. They are destined to expose every part of themselves so the rest of us can know what it means to be human. Most people lead their private lives. They have been given natural modesty that feels to them like morality, but it's not. It's luck. They shake their heads at the people with their clothes off rather than learning about human life from their example. But they are wrong to act so superior. Some of us have to be naked so the rest can be exempted by fate. So with that said, I'm going to share something. Again, I said I haven't shared publicly, certainly not with his actual voice. It's about 3 minutes. And I'm interested in your thoughts, but this is it's our second phone conversation, my second phone conversation with Mark.
This was in one of the drafts I deleted, but...
And the draft, when he mentions drafts he deleted, it's in one of the emails he was writing to me.
I distinctly remember when I was in grade school, probably, deciding not to have emotions because that way, like the other kids in my class couldn't use them to hurt me, which is not really a productive way to go through life. But
do you think that then reflected on this idea that others not having emotions or not responding?
No, it wasn't like that. I thought other people shouldn't have emotions. It was just like I didn't want to give anybody else anything they could grab onto that they could use to hurt me.
What were some of the thoughts that you had, or can you recall having that night, either before or during or immediately after? I know you said you remembered me crying.
Yeah.
But do you remember, what sort of thoughts you were going through your mind?
Let me think. Yeah, I remember knowing that I shouldn't be doing this and doing it anyway. And then, like I said, I remember you started to cry and that I laid down. And there was a little gap where I laid down, and then I was thinking maybe, that you were so drunk you wouldn't remember it, or that it was bad, maybe it would be okay. And then you did start to cry, and I remember you whispering, "He raped me," and realizing that it wasn't going to be okay. And then it's just, however many hours of, me realizing what I had just done and, that it wasn't going to be okay.
Who did I, let's change, I used that word, but I used the word rape because I recall not thinking of it that way. Did I just whisper that to no one, or?
Just, under your breath.
Oh.
I just remember you were crying and said that. And yeah, it's tough even really to think about.
And so what was so interesting to me is that was, like I said, the second phone conversation. And the first phone conversation, he didn't mention me whispering he raped me. And that was after I told him the FBI's definition of rape. And in 2013, the FBI revised the definition of rape to be penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. So it was really interesting to me that back then I used that word, and I don't see any reason for him to have lied about that. And I think what I'll do, because I want to leave sufficient time for Q&A, I'm going to play one more audio recording because I think it reveals his thought process and how that could have led to him thinking that sexually assaulting me would be okay. And then, so I'll play that, and then we can open up for Q&A. One's also short. This is from the first phone conversation.
Do you think then, I mean, I don't know what you're, sorry, I'm like getting in all these like big questions, but what is your dating life been like since then? Do you think it's affected then how you?
I basically don't have a social life. I mean, I really have never seriously dated.
Okay. Had you been with anyone before that night with what happened? Like, have you ever?
I figured we would get here eventually, but yeah, I'm like the 40-year-old virgin.
Okay, so you had never been with anyone. Okay.
No.
Okay, so then.
Which is also something I don't really talk about with people, but.
Sure, I can understand. Do you, I can't believe these are like some of the questions I'm immediately cutting into, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sure this is one of these things that will feel healthy in retrospect.
Okay. I think as long as if we think about this tying feelings to events, it's supposed to be very cathartic, provided someone recounts. I've looked into this, like you're not supposed to just recount straight events or just account feelings, like you're supposed to do both. But anyway, this is whatever I'll say. What kind of porn did you watch in high school? And did it ever depict non-consensual sex? I think that both affected the approach to the assault, where like you stopped at a certain point, where it was almost like, the experience of porn where you're observing. Do you know what I mean? Or
no, I mean. I don't know. I wasn't, obviously I watched porn. I wasn't really into I wasn't watching, simulated rapes, if that's what you're getting at.
I'm not judging. But I guess I'm just trying to, and I'm also not trying to be reductive and think like porn leads to this, anything like that. But I guess I was just curious if you feel comfortable answering. I remember, by the way, when you accidentally stole a Playboy. Do you remember that from the drugstore nearby?
It wasn't a Playboy. It was a. Well, okay. There's two aspects of that are wrong. It's that it wasn't a Playboy. It was the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue.
Oh, okay.
And it wasn't so much accidental as I just said it was accidental, and I really was just stealing it. I went through a little phase when I was a kid where I started like stealing like little stuff just to see if I could.
Yeah. Okay. That's the part. I just remember us all making fun of you for that, and it being sort of like charming, stealing this magazine from the drugstore. But thank you for clearing that up.
Yeah, I was banned from. It was super embarrassing. I was banned from Drug Mart for until I was 21. I think it was. I actually didn't go back in until I was 21.
That's really funny.
Yeah, so what was so hard for me in listening to the audio was, I don't know, it was hard. I was so accommodating to him. I was acting in ways that you wouldn't necessarily expect someone to act with someone who had hurt them. And so I didn't act the way I thought I would. I thought I would be so much tougher. And so I'm hoping, especially right now, I'm worried about the damage that is happening as a result of the Weinstein trial and the defense's tactic of, well, these women still sent nice emails to him, or, we're still friendly, and therefore it had to have been consensual. I'm just hoping that in some way, as mortifying as it was in a lot of ways for me to release the book, that it shows we don't necessarily know how we're going to react. And I don't think we don't react in ways that we expect we'll react. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Don't hesitate. Yeah.
I do. The first excerpt you played from the second phone call, after you listened to that for the first time, did you realize, or did you say to yourself, okay, so I asked him what his thoughts were, what his feelings were, and he had to stop and say, let me think just a minute. And just listening to it, I think to myself, okay, unfortunately for you, you don't get that ability to, let me stop and try to recount what I was thinking, because it's ingrained, unfortunately, in your memory each and every day. Did you notice that when you first went back? Is that something that you noticed was a pattern in when you were asking those types of tough questions?
I mean, to be perfectly honest, like when immediately after, like when I was transcribing this and I would hear him, there was this very gullible part of me where I kept thinking of him as the friend, as like this close friend of 5 years, and why would he be, like, I didn't see him as being manipulative. And I mean, of course, I think you're absolutely right. And at a certain point, I did become concerned. Is he telling me what he wants me, or what he thinks I want him to say? Like, I mean, and so a moment like that, like, let me think. But when I initially transcribed it, I think what I fixated on, I don't like admitting this, but I hear him start to choke back. It's at a certain point, it sounds like he's going to cry, and then he's withholding, and I remember thinking, oh, that's very nice of him, because he understands, maybe he's being self-aware and understands that I'm upset, and that him crying or demonstrating extreme emotion about this, that it would take away or be distracting. I mean, I was looking for every reason to give him the benefit of the doubt in a way that, like, I would not do if I weren't a part of this and a friend had done what I did and I listened to it. I would more likely be extremely critical. Like, I can get really angry on the behalf of my students who open up to me and tell me about their experiences with sexual assault, and I can get very frustrated. But then with my own experience, I had this way of just trying to find the good in him. So I think, yeah, it's not something that I noticed, like that pause of him when I transcribed it. I fixated on, oh, it sounds like he's choking back tears.
Also, wondering, do you think, has there been a time, or do you think there will be a time where you talk to Mark and communicate the whole breadth of your feelings without accommodating him? Or do you think you even need to do that for yourself?
We've been in touch since, just by text, because potentially there might be a radio program on it, and I was kind of put in a weird position where we need his permission. And I'm back to the very beginning, and that was a few weeks ago, and it was infuriating. And the problem, I think, for me is that I think in a lot of ways I'm still processing it. Like, there are times I'm like really angry, and then other times, like, I'll hear the audio and I'll feel bad for him. Like, I don't like admitting that I feel bad for him, but I think it's hard because I'm still processing it. Like, I didn't wait to write this book until after I felt I had a clear understanding of the events. I mean, I think I'm still figuring it out. But I don't know if last we left things, he didn't say what he thought of the book. He did tell me he read it. He just said, I'm still processing it. I just read it. And that was a few weeks ago, and that was where I want to be like, but did you like the writing? Like, how was that? Like, I don't care about any of the other stuff. Someone left me a really, I shouldn't check, but there was like there was a negative review. But it was really funny because at the end of the review, it was like, but Vanasco can write. And I was like, oh, great. Like, that's fine. Like, I don't care, like, all the character, like, tearing down my character and whatever. Like, they like the writing, so that's good. So actually, that's the big thing I want to know. Did he like the writing? Yeah.
So I read the newspaper article, and in the newspaper article, it said that one of the things that you were not quite okay, that you definitely weren't okay with, was that he had apologized to you, but his family didn't know about it. And apparently because you were friends when you were in high school, you were really close to his parents, and then it cut off, and you had said that they just, you assumed that they figured, well, you grew up, life goes on, you go off to high school and stuff, but that he had told you that his parents did not know about this. So now that the book has come out, has that changed at all?
I don't think they know about it. And it certainly, I mean, I reflect on what makes, this isn't actually in the book, but I've reflected a lot on like what makes a good apology. And I was raised Catholic, and I remember being a kid and very confused how the confessional works. So I was like, wait, you go in the confessional and you say what you did wrong, but you never have to apologize to the person you harmed. You just have to tell the priest, and then you get you get away with it, basically. You can get forgiven without having to do the hard work of apologizing to the person you harmed. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, that seems really easy. And so with Mark's apology, like, as the book came to an end, and I was thinking, why am I? I'm like, I'm really annoyed that he knows that I want his family to know, and I feel silly in some ways, and I'm like, I want him to tell his parents. But I realized, like, that's what would make it a good apology, because I think a good apology, you don't just keep it private. I'm not saying you go on social media and you tell everyone what you did, but I think you don't just apologize to the person you harmed, but you apologize to people within that community who were affected by it in some way. And so I think it's frustrating to me because I'm the only one he's talked with about this. I mean, I hate to say, but at a certain point, I was even researching sliding scale therapists within a 5-mile radius of where he worked, because I was like, he needs to talk to someone. And that's like, and my therapist was like, that's not your job. And obviously my friends were like, don't find him help. Like, that he can do that. But it's frustrating to me that I think he knows that is what would give me, I don't even know if I really believe in closure, but it would make me feel better. But I don't think his parents know.
And the rest of your group of friends at that time, as you said, it said in the paper something about anybody who would read the book would know who he was because of. And so have you had that, this wider group of people, or you have no?
No, I haven't had any contact. I'm not on social media, like, no judgment for people who are, but I like not being on there. I like people so much, not being on social media. And so I think if I were still on like Facebook or whatever and we're connected to people from high school, that maybe it would have found its way back, but I'm not. And I haven't really kept in touch with, I lost those relationships from high school, I think partly because of this. Because I certainly didn't want to spend time with our friends when he was going to be there, and he was almost always going to be there. Yeah.
I guess, how do you think that your journalism background, did that play into effect when you heard back your interviews, when you said, I was very accommodating? Was that, you think that your background of trying to get someone to open up and tell you that story, that story, do you think that played into any of what you thought when you were accommodating?
Definitely. I think at a certain point it's odd. Like, I think one of the bigger questions of the book, and like, you can go crazy trying to figure out if someone's being genuine or if you're being genuine. But at certain points, I do think I was manipulating him. I remember when I went to meet with him in person, I thought, okay, should I wear like a pink shirt to seem like it'll throw him off? Like maybe I'm just like, I'll seem especially friendly and he'll like keep opening up and giving me more information. I mean, it was like little things like that, and body language. How can I get him to give me more information? So I do think the journalism background influenced my behavior in terms of there were times I felt or worried I was manipulating him, and times when I just slipped into, I guess, what an academic would call, performance of gender, where it doesn't feel like a performance, but you do act the way you've sort of been socialized. But I also think the journalism background influenced me in terms of my obsession with getting things precisely right. Like I didn't want to get anything wrong, because I also thought, well, then my whole story could be discredited. I mean, that wasn't just so much journalism as having been someone who's experienced sexual assault. And if you've ever been asked questions about your experience, somebody's looking to poke holes in it. But I think it was a combination of that, and just I'm someone who, I know there are some memoirs who have this idea of capital T truth, and then, that you can conflate you can conflate characters or change chronology because you're getting an emotional truth. I like to think of facts as formal constraints, much the way a poet thinks of, certain forms as maybe a constraint to get you to somewhere else artistically. So I definitely think the journalism background influenced me in multiple ways. Yeah.
How long did it take you to process what happened as far as right after it happened? And did you try to get help or help to determine how to process it, or was it something that you tried to work through yourself?
I just tried not to think about it. So when it had happened, my dad had died the year prior, and it was like surrounding the 1-year anniversary of his death. And I didn't want to let myself get upset about this, because I thought, okay, my grief for my dad, that's what I'm focused on. So when I would go to see a campus therapist, and intake questions would, have you ever been sexually assaulted? And I remember saying, well, yeah, but that's not what I'm here for. And I would try and push that aside. So I never really talked about it with anyone, not with anyone professionally, or I would try to push it aside. Yeah.
I also read the article in the paper and mention of the 14 years of nightmares. And I noticed in the recordings that you don't really sound fearful. And I'm curious, were the nightmares fear-inducing? And did that change or morph or go away after you started confronting?
They didn't. I feel like they happened more frequently after I reached out to him. But I remember thinking that the nightmares hadn't really started until the famed Access Hollywood tape came out. And I felt like that around then was when I started having nightmares more. And I told my partner, Chris, and he's like, no, you've been having nightmares and I've been with him for 10 years now. He's like, you've been having nightmares for as long as I've known you. Every few months you wake up crying and I ask you what's wrong and you say, Mark. And so I don't think I ever let myself feel anything about the nightmares. It was more of well, that happened and moving on. I just tried not to think about them. Yeah.
I have a question. Did you report this to the police, and what can you do about the nightmares that you have? Is there any solution or what you can do?
I don't know. I mean, I don't have them as much anymore. I didn't report it to the police. I had it, and it's in the book. I had a bad experience with a high school teacher who was very inappropriate, and I did report him. And I was treated like a liar from the very beginning by detectives. And it was there were questions like, well, he was a teacher he'd rubbed his hand up my thigh in between my legs, and I remember jumping up and not wanting to make him uncomfortable, saying oh, I forgot I have somewhere to be, I have to go babysit. And when I told the principal, who then involved detectives. The detectives, one of the first questions were like, well, are you sure his hand didn't slip? Like things like that. So I just thought, okay, like it didn't even occur to me to report this. And then as for nightmare, I mean, I don't really know. I think writing the book helped me process it in some ways, and I don't think about it as much, just because I spent so much time thinking about it intensely for, the 8 months of writing it, and then the pre-publication stage and the book tour, that I just don't really have them anymore. That's not to say they've gone away entirely, but I don't think there's necessarily a solution. Yeah.
Along those lines, one of the more striking parts of the book for me was at one point your friends told you got him on tape admitting a crime. The statute of limitations is still active. Can you talk a little bit about that conversation and what you decided?
Yeah, I mean, it was a question, and I know I don't want to keep people, I think it's 7:32, so cut me off. I'm happy to answer however many questions, but I'm sure the library also needs to clean up. With the statute of limitations, and it's interesting. It's why some of the victims in the Weinstein trial, they can't come forward because the statute of limitations varies state by state. And Ohio, it's one of the most strangely liberal states with statute of limitations. And it's 25 years. And I thought about what would it mean if I even came forward? It doesn't seem why does it not seem right to me? Why does that feel wrong? And I think that's more of a comment on our criminal justice system and the way in which we handle these cases where there's no really, on a national scale, there isn't a program in place where there's consistent effort toward rehabilitating people. It's not like there's therapy. It's a very controversial notion to give therapy to prisoners convicted of rape and sexual assault. And so I didn't think it would give me any closure, and maybe I'm gullible. I believed him when he told me he hadn't done it again. And I understand that statistically that it's possible, but I just didn't see. I was more interested with this book in moral accountability and saw it as a form, this book being my form of holding him accountable. And that's not to say that that's the right way or that other people shouldn't hold their perpetrator legally accountable. It just didn't feel right to me in this instance. Yes.
First of all, I want to say thank you for writing this, and I think it's very brave, not just for acknowledging what happened to you, but living in a world in which women are condemned for what men do to them. So I think you're very, very brave for that. And I don't find it at all surprising or interesting that you go out of your way to try to make Mark feel somewhat comfortable. And you were just talking about it. I can see that some people would say, well, you should be prosecuting him. It is such a complex and dangerous world. And I doubt that there's a woman here who has not been sexually assaulted. And our first, almost always, reaction is, what did I do wrong? And, oh, it wasn't that bad. And, oh, he must feel awful. And all these things that, first of all, should not be part of it. And secondly, I can't imagine one man on earth taking that attitude about anything that would happen to him. And I hope that you are not getting ugly comments from people over this. And this whole thing about processing, you're still processing, obviously, whatever the heck that means. we never stop. I mean, I'm 66 or 7 years old. I have no idea how old I am. And I'm still having trouble figuring out it's not my fault for being drugged. And because what was I doing there? I don't know, I was just there, you know? And I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your bravery in doing this, and mostly in contacting Mark. And I suppose I'm supposed to feel some sort of wonderfulness towards him, but I don't. And because he didn't ever just come out and say to his parents, to your parents, to everybody in the world, I did this to somebody.
Right.
You know, and so I don't have feeling for his anguish or whatever the heck it might be. I recognize it might be there. But somehow in this world, somewhere, we have to stop saying, oh, the poor guys. You know, and sometimes there are poor guys who were raped, you know, and we can say poor guy for him, but not for the guys who perpetrate. And the plain fact of the matter is, there's no one to blame but them.
Right.
And so much.
Thank you. I mean, it's hard because I agree with you, and I'm so sorry. But I agree with you, and I think that it's hard because if we see them as villains, it can be hard. If we see the humanity in them, right, it's tricky because you risk apologizing for them. But then if you don't look for that humanity, I mean, something that's not going reported on as much with Weinstein, and some of his victims have said he could be quite charming. He could make you feel like you were the most important person. But it's not comfortable to say that Weinstein could be nice, right? And so it's hard to hold people accountable because I think like Brock Turner went to jail for 3 months. And there was this idea, well, he was a really good swimmer and he was an upstanding guy, went to Stanford, it was a mistake. And it's just so complicated trying to figure it out where I want people to recognize that people, like men that you might not expect to have committed sexual assault very well could have done it. It's just like, how do you communicate it in such a way where you're not apologizing for them, but also showing what the seemingly nice guys are capable of. I mean, it's hard. It's like really hard. I just want to check with the library. Maybe one more question? Okay. I'm just someone who hasn't asked yet. Yeah, right here.
Is there anything that you learned about yourself that was unexpected through both of your experiences with rape?
Probably just, I didn't realize how accommodating I could be toward men, and how much I worried about making them not feel bad. Like when I reflect back on a lot of the experiences of sexual assault, I just think about the ways in which I didn't want to. My fear was embarrassing them, which they didn't want them to feel embarrassed. And that, it bothers me. I think I understand Judith Butler's gender performance a lot more now in a way that I didn't understand it necessarily when I read her. Just that I think I'll be tough in certain situations, and then I'm not. I immediately become concerned about how the man is feeling. And that was something I think, at least I realized in talking with Mark. But yeah, I think it was just how much I was prioritizing, like so many women I know, prioritizing the feelings of men over their own feelings. So thank you all so much for coming, sitting through that.